Dragon Emperor Sun Chapter 241 to Chapter 250. Of course I did, can I be that stupid? But we were covered by a red cloth and opened a slit to see, so the ginseng couldn't escape. Ling Feng quickly explained. Hearing Ling Feng say this, David and Sonia were even more convinced that this guy was deceived by others, and even Reuben couldn't help shaking his head with a helpless wry smile. This Ling Feng is just a son. He has never beaten him in the society, so he thinks a lot of things too naively. After all, who is the son of Horrendal, who dares to provoke him? Just the Audi car outside, driving anywhere in Horrendal, others hide far away. I believe you didn't lie, absolutely. David suddenly followed Ling Feng with a serious face. Just when Ling Feng looked at David and couldn't figure out what David meant, David, who was originally serious, laughed again, and then said, "But I don't believe that Shannon, maybe you lied." Ling Feng's eyes widened, he understood that David still didn't believe it. "Today I have to hit you in the face, I want you to see if it's grassroots or wild ginseng." Ling Feng was in a hurry, took the box and opened it. When the box was opened, Ling Feng was stunned for a moment, only to see that there were a few dry grass roots lying inside the box. Where is the 1,000-year-old ginseng? Giggle. Seeing this, Sonia almost burst into tears when she laughed. Reuben couldn't help but laughed out loud. 1 million, buying a few grass roots, what a big deal. Damn, dare to lie to me, I will definitely find him and put him in prison for the rest of his life. Listening to the laughter of several people, Ling Feng threw the box to the ground angrily and roared loudly. "Do you know the name of the person who sells your ginseng? Where does he live? Where do you go to find him? That's Yunchensh, not Horrendal. Your dad's hands can't reach there." David continued to stimulate Ling Feng, and Ling Feng's face flushed with anger, but he had nothing to say. After all, what David said was the truth. Okay, eat a lot of money and gain wisdom. If you walk in society, there is no way you won't suffer. Let's continue to drink tea. Reuben hurriedly gave Ling Feng a step down. Otherwise, David would really make trouble with Ling Feng, and this matter would not end well. After all, Ling Feng was the son of the leader of Horrendal, and Reuben would not dare to offend him easily. "Uncle Su, I still have a few 100-year-old ginseng plants at home. They are all genuine. I will ask the driver to bring them to you now." Ling Feng felt that he had no face, so he planned to ask the driver to come over to the few ginseng plants at home. "Xiao Feng, no need, Uncle Su has taken your heart." Reuben quickly stopped him. But Ling Feng had already stood up and walked to the car, whispered a few words with the driver, and looked at David from time to time. The driver nodded and drove away. After just over 20 minutes, the driver came back with a gift box in his hand. After seeing Ling Feng, he handed it to Ling Feng and said a few words in Ling Feng's ear. After the driver finished speaking, a flash of excitement flashed on Ling Feng's face, and he looked at David with contempt in his eyes. Ling Feng waved his hand and told the driver to go out and wait, while he walked up to Reuben with a gift box. "Uncle Su, here are a few 100-year-old ginseng plants, make soup and drink it yourself when you have nothing to do." This time, Ling Feng personally opened the gift box in person, and there were indeed several ginseng plants inside, and they were all in good condition. "Xiao Feng, you don't have to be so polite. Since it was your intention, Uncle Su will take it." Reuben took the gift box. "Uncle Su, you should pay attention to your health in the future. You can't eat everything given to you, especially the food given by prisoners. You don't know that these people are very bad. There is no good person in prison. I can't change his identity as a prisoner through labor." When Ling Feng said this, he looked directly at David, his face was full of sarcasm. Obviously, he just asked the driver to investigate David and know some things about David. "Ling Feng, what do you mean? Are there no good people who have been in prison? Don't be thorny in your words. When Sonia heard that Ling Feng was obviously targeting David, she immediately became unhappy. Seeing that Sonia was actually protecting David, Ling Feng's face instantly turned ugly, and he yelled at Sonia, "Sonia, I ask you, what attracted you to this prisoner of labor? Why do you always speak for him? I am right. Can't you see your thoughts? As long as the two of us come together, the Sui family can prosper forever in Horrendal, isn't that bad? Ling Feng, although you are the second generation of officials that everyone admires, but I don't care, do you understand?" Sonia glanced at Ling Feng annoyed. Why is this?" Ling Feng grabbed Sonia's arm and said, "Am I not as good as this labor reformer? Where am I not as good as him?" Ling Feng roared loudly with a hideous expression on his face. Sonia frowned, her expression slightly painful. "Ling Feng, you hurt me." But that Ling Feng seemed to be crazy, he was holding on to Sonia tightly, and he didn't let go at all. Xiao Feng. Reuben's face turned cold, it was too much to directly attack his daughter in front of him. "You wanna die?" David's eyes narrowed slightly, and a murderous intent burst out from his body. Then he directly reached out and placed his hand on Ling Feng's wrist. Ling Feng only felt that his wrist was being clamped by a vice, and an intense pain came from his heart. "What?" With an exclamation, Ling Feng let go of his hand, and Sonia took the opportunity to run behind David. On the other hand, David smashed Ling Feng with a punch. "David, don't do it!" Reuben hurriedly stopped. "Ling Feng is Horrendal's #1 son, how can he hit him casually? This punch is afraid that it will be a bad thing. If David is not serious, and he kills Ling Feng with one punch, then it will be a big problem." Seeing Reuben speak, David closed his fist in time, but the sharp fist style still caused a burning pain on Ling Feng's face, and his crotch instantly became wet. With such a big life, how could Ling Feng be bullied so much before? Just feeling David's fist, this Ling Feng was scared to death. "You dare to touch Sonia, I will kill you." David flicked it gently, and Ling Feng flew out of the pavilion in an instant, and fell heavily on the ground. Ling Feng stood up, his eyes were full of viciousness, looking at his wet pants, he had no face to stay. "Boy, you are just a prisoner of labor reform, dare to follow me against me, I will kill you in minutes, you wait for me." Ling Feng put down the harsh words, turned around and left. After Ling Feng left, Reuben breathed a sigh of relief. "Fortunately, you stopped. If you hit him, I'm afraid this matter will be difficult to handle. This is the top son of the city. His wrist has been pinched by me," David said lightly. He already knew Ling Feng's identity, so what if he was the son of the city's top leader? David is not afraid at all. "What?" Reuben was shocked. You broke Ling Feng's wrist?" "It's broken." Sonia was also shocked. "It's over, I'm afraid that Ling Feng will not give up now." Reuben and Sonia's faces were full of worry. "It seems that I can only ask Gugu about this matter. Although he has retired from the provincial government, he should still have some contacts who can help him catch up." Reuben immediately thought of Gu Wenchen. Although the Sui family is the richest man in Horrendal, in the eyes of those politicians, these businessmen are just pawns to make money, and they have no identity at all. Although that guy is the son of the city's leader, don't be so nervous, right? He just broke his wrist, but it's not impossible to connect. Besides, as the leader of the city, his father wouldn't be unreasonable, right? Seeing Reuben's worried look, David was puzzled. "You don't know, this Ling Feng is used to doing good things in Horrendal. Although Mayor Ling is upright and honest, but because he is busy with work, he is not clear about this Ling Feng at all, and no one dares to tell him. It has become what it is now, and I still go to the ancients to ask about this matter." After Reuben finished speaking, he left immediately and went to ask Gu Wenchen. "You really shouldn't start so hard, this is really troublesome." Sonia looked at David helplessly and said, "Whoever moves you, I'll hit whoever, even Tian Wang Laozi." David looked at Sonia and said seriously. Seeing David's serious look, Sonia felt sweet in her heart, gave David a blank look and said, "You better go out and hide, let my dad find Gugu, and when the matter is resolved, you are coming back." Sonia pushed David away. She was afraid that Ling Feng would really find someone to come over and make trouble in the future. David was helpless. After being pushed out by Sonia, he had to go home first. The resources in the 7-star disc were enough for him to practice for a day. After returning home, David didn't go anywhere, just practiced in his room. The next morning, Reuben personally called David and asked David to go to Sue's house. David couldn't help but listen to this old husband's call. When David arrived at Sue's house, he found that Reuben had prepared a whole trunk of gifts. "David, I'll take you to Mayor Ling's house in a while, talk to Mayor Ling well, and apologize. I feel that Mayor Ling is a man of righteousness and will not embarrass you." Reuben followed David and said. David wanted to refuse, but seeing Reuben's black eye circles, it was obvious that he had been worrying about his own affairs a lot yesterday, so David nodded and agreed. Sonia originally wanted to follow, but Reuben was afraid that after Sonia followed, any conflict would be worth the loss, so he did not let her follow. After getting ready, Reuben drove David to Mayor Ling's house. This Mayor Ling is named Ling Zhenchuan. He has been the leader of Horrendal for more than 10 years. With his own strength, he has made Horrendal a small town and has slowly developed into a very capable official. Soon, the car stopped in an old community, a small Western-style building with only 2 floors and an area of more than 200 square meters, which is Ling Zhenquan's current home. It is very uncommon for the head of a city to live in such a place, but in front of this small Western-style building, there is a $1 million luxury car parked, and it is very mismatched with this building. After entering, don't say a few words, don't be impulsive. Reuben warned David again. David could only nod his head. After ringing the doorbell, the door was soon opened by a middle-aged woman in an apron. This person was Ling Zhenquan's wife, Wang Hui. "Mrs. Ling, we have an appointment with Mayor Ling." After Reuben saw the middle-aged woman, he immediately said politely. When David heard that, this person turned out to be the mayor's wife, and couldn't help but be surprised. The wife of the head of a city is so simple. "Old Su, come in quickly," Lao Ling told me. Wang Hui opened the door and welcomed Reuben and David in enthusiastically. "If you say you come, and bring something, Lao Ling's, it's not like you don't know your temper." "Mrs. Ling, these are some milk and honey, and the value is definitely not more than 1,000 yuan. Reuben hurriedly explained. Ling Zhenchuan has a rule, that is, he can't bring gifts when he is a guest at home. Even if it is a visit from relatives and friends, the value of the gift cannot exceed 1,000, otherwise he will not accept it. Listening to Reuben's words, Wang Hui took the things over. "Lao Su, you two find a place to sit, Lao Ling is discussing things with a few Hong Kong, it will be soon. Don't worry about Mrs. Ling." Reuben smiled slightly, then followed David to sit on the sofa on the side. David looked at the room. They were all relatively old furniture. They were all worthless. They didn't look like the home of the leader of the city. And Wang Hui, as the mayor's wife, could still be so amiable, David thought. I don't understand how a mother like Wang Hui could teach someone like Ling Feng. After Reuben and David sat for a while, the door of the study was opened, and the 4 people filed out. One of them is Ling Zhenchuan, a gentle and elegant middle-aged man in his 40s with glasses. Although he wears ordinary clothes, he has the aura of a superior. The other 3 people should be Hong Kong businessmen. One of them is a small Hong Kong businessman with a goatee and bright eyes. David actually felt a wave of spiritual energy from this Hong Kong businessman. Is this guy also a cultivator? David couldn't help but take a few more glances. Mayor Ling, I hope you can think about it carefully. Our investment will definitely strengthen the economic development of Horrendal. As long as you divide the south of the city to us, we will be able to rebuild a city within 3 years. The Hong Kong businessman with the goatee said. I'm sorry, I can't let my grandchildren stab me in the spine just for the money, and I won't harm the interests of every citizen. To achieve political achievements, I rely not only on money, but also on the general public support. This matter will not be discussed, and it will not be sent far. Ling Zhenquan's face was cold and he said sharply. It can be seen that Ling Zhenchuan was not very happy to negotiate with a few Hong Kong people. Since Mayor Ling insists so much, then we have nothing to talk about, farewell. The goatee Hong Kong businessman reached out to Ling Zhenchuan. Although it was unpleasant to talk, there was always a minimum of etiquette. Ling Zhenchuan followed the Hong Kong businessman and shook hands. But at the moment when the palms of the two people met, a faint black mist entered Ling Zhenquan's body directly along the palm of their hands, but Ling Zhenchuan didn't notice it. However, this scene was watched by David. David frowned and stared closely at the goatee Hong Kong merchant. The Hong Kong businessman also seemed to sense something, and turned his head to look at David, but after just one look, he turned his head back. After the 3 Hong Kong businessmen left, Ling Zhenchuan sat on the sofa angrily, drinking the tea brought by Wang Hui. His face was ugly. Lao Ling, Lao Su will be waiting for you for a while. Wang Hui reminded Ling Zhenchuan. Ling Zhenchuan just remembered it, and hurriedly greeted Reuben, Old Su, come and sit down, I just got dizzy, I'll forget you. Ling Zhenchuan got up and followed Reuben apologetically. Mayor Ling is very polite. You work day and night for Horrendal. I'm so sorry to bother you. Reuben walked over, and David followed behind. Old Su, your credit is not small for Horrendal to develop to what it is now. Without your support, even if I have 3 heads and 6 arms, I would be useless. Ling Zhenchuan chuckled. The piece of land west of your Su family city, Xiao Feng told me that I have already sent someone to start the approval process. As long as it is legal and compliant, you can just come to me directly, and there is no need to let Xiao Feng pass the word. In addition, Gu Gu also called me and said that you are coming to apologize to me. What's going on? Reuben hurriedly explained. Mayor Ling, at my house yesterday, Xiao Feng and David had a little misunderstanding. As a result, the two of them had a conflict. David hit Xiao Feng on impulse, so I brought him here today. Apologize to Mayor Ling. Ling Zhenchuan glanced at David and smiled lightly. Young man, it's normal to have a little temper. If you hit him, hit him. You still use it to disturb the ancients. I thought you did something illegal. If that's it, it's not easy for anyone to make a phone call. No, no. Reuben shook his head quickly, and then said to David, David, please apologize to Mayor Ling first. David's first impression of Ling Zhenchuan was very good. It could be seen that Ling Zhenchuan was a just and honest official who loved the people like a son. Looking at Ling Zhenchuan and Wang Hui and his wife, David really didn't understand whether Ling Feng was their biological son or not. Mayor Ling, I took a heavy shot yesterday and broke young Master Ling's wrist, but being able to take it back will not affect my future life. David followed Ling Zhenchuan lightly. David didn't have an attitude of apology, because he didn't think he should apologize. The reason why he followed Ling Zhenchuan so politely was because Ling Zhenchuan was a good official. When they heard that David broke Ling Feng's wrist, both Ling Zhenchuan and Wang Hui were stunned, and their brows were wrinkled. Seeing this, Reuben hurriedly explained, and recounted everything one by one, including Ling Feng's actions on Sonia in public. After listening to Reuben's narration, Ling Zhenquan's face immediately flushed with anger, and he looked at Wang Hui and said, Is that BA5TARD back? No, I didn't come back yesterday. Wang Hui shook her head. Ling Zhenchuan gritted his teeth. When this BA5TARD comes back, I will definitely break his legs. After speaking, Ling Zhenchuan took out his mobile phone and called his driver directly. Soon, the driver arrived by car. As soon as he entered the door and saw Ruben and David, the driver was slightly stunned. Mayor Ling, you're looking for me. The driver's body was trembling slightly, and he seemed to be scared. Xiao Sun, let me ask you, did that brat use my car yesterday? Ling Zhenchuan asked sharply. No. The driver stammered and couldn't say a word. Bang! Ling Zhenchuan suddenly slapped the coffee table and shouted loudly, "Tell me the truth." The driver trembled with fright. Mr. Ling has used the car. When Ling Zhenchuan heard this, his whole body trembled with anger. Why did I tell you that he is not allowed to move my car? Can't you remember? The car belongs to the country, not his Ling Feng's. He can use it if he wants to. Use? I see if you don't want to do it anymore. The driver Xiao Sun was so frightened that he was shivering and was about to cry. Seeing this, Wang Hui hurriedly persuaded Ling Zhenchuan, "Lao Ling, don't be angry for now. If you get angry, I will take care of him in the future. Now Xiao Feng's wrist is broken, I don't know where it is. Let's find him first. Find AF.art and let him die outside." Ling Zhenquan's chest heaved up and down with anger. My whole life's wiseness will be destroyed by this BA5TARD sooner or later. Wang Hui kept slapping Ling Zhenchuan on the back, then looked at the driver Xiao Sun and said, "Xiao Sun, do you know where Xiao Feng is?" "Madam, young Master Ling is in the hospital now, and his wrist has been connected, but he is contacting people now, and he seems to want revenge." At this time, Xiao Sun didn't dare to hide it from Ling Feng and said truthfully, "Little BA5TARD, how dare he take revenge?" Ling Zhenchuan jumped up when he heard it. "Bring him back to me right now, if he doesn't come back, then never let him come back." Xiao Sun nodded at him and hurried away. "Mayor Ling, after all Xiao Feng is still young, don't be too angry." Seeing this, Ruben quickly persuaded him. "Hey," Ling Zhenchuan sighed, "Old Su, I really made you laugh. The family is unfortunate, and such a beast was born." Ling Zhenchuan looked at David, and said with shame on his face, "Young man, I made you laugh. Even if I die, I deserve it. I can't blame you. It's us parents who didn't discipline me well. Mayor Ling, no one is perfect. I believe that under the guidance of Mayor Ling and his wife, young Master Ling will correct himself." David also admires Ling Zhenchuan as a person. The reason why Ling Feng has become like this must be related to Ling Zhenquan's selfless work. He is only focused on his work, and he will definitely neglect the education of his children. This has caused Ling Feng's arrogant and domineering character. Soon, the driver Xiao Sun brought Ling Feng back. Ling Feng's arm was bandaged and had already been bandaged. After Ling Feng entered the door, he was not surprised to see David and Ruben. It seemed that the driver Xiao Sun had already told him. "Dad!" Ling Feng tremblingly followed Ling Zhenchuan and shouted, "Little BA5TARD, I'll crush you to death." Ling Zhenchuan picked up the stool and was about to smash Ling Feng, which scared Ling Feng and hid in the corner. It seemed that he was very afraid of Ling Zhenchuan. "Lao Ling, what are you doing?" Wang Hui hurriedly grabbed Ling Zhenchuan, winked at Ling Feng desperately, and let Ling Feng run upstairs. "Mayor Ling, don't be too angry." Ruben also stepped forward to persuade him. But at this moment, Ling Zhenchuan, who was holding a stool, suddenly fell to the ground with his eyes darkened. This sudden change shocked Wang Hui and Ruben. Lao Ling, Wang Hui shouted anxiously, and then said to the driver Xiao Sun, "Hurry up and take it to the hospital." "Wait a minute." David stepped forward at this time and put his hand on Ling Zhenquan's forehead. Wang Hui looked at David with a puzzled face, and then Ruben remembered that David is a genius doctor. "Mrs. Ling, David knows medical skills, just let him see it," Ruben explained to Wang Hui. Wang Hui nodded and looked at David with suspicion. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. After David checked Ling Zhenchuan, his face became very solemn and his brows were furrowed. David, is Mayor Ling serious? Seeing David like that, Reuben panicked. If something happened to Ling Zhenchuan, where would he find such a good leader? Mayor Ling just fainted out of anger, nothing major. David shook his head, but at this time David was worried about another thing. In Ling Zhenquan's body, someone cast a soul evocation technique, which made David confirm the guess just now that the goatee-bearded Hong Kong businessman, when shaking hands with Ling Zhenchuan, cast a soul evocation technique in Ling Zhenquan's body. As for the effect of soul evocation, it is self-evident. Those who are hit by soul evocation will temporarily lose their souls and become a walking corpse for those who use soul evocation. It seems that the goatee-bearded Hong Kong businessman used Ling Zhenquan's soul evocation technique for the development of that area in the south of the city. As long as Ling Zhenchuan is used by them, they can't do whatever they want. Since it's not a big deal, wake up Mayor Ling. Reuben saw Wang Hui's anxiety. In order to reassure Wang Hui, Reuben urged David to wake up Ling Zhenchuan first. David nodded, and lightly tapped Ling Zhenquan's acupuncture point. Ling Zhenchuan slowly opened his eyes. Lao Ling, you woke up, but you scared me to death. Seeing that Ling Zhenchuan was awake, Wang Hui let out a long sigh of relief. Ling Zhenchuan opened his eyes with a bit of confusion in his eyes. What's wrong with me? You fainted from anger. You have already told me not to let you be so arrogant. You just don't listen. Fortunately, this young man is here today, otherwise we wouldn't know what to do. Wang Hui said and helped Ling Zhenchuan up. Ling Zhenchuan couldn't help but glance at David, and said in surprise, "Young man, do you still have medical skills?" "Understand?" David nodded. "Mayor Ling, David not only knows a little medical skills, but he knows a lot. My illness is what he likes." Reuben followed Ling Zhenchuan proudly. How to say that David will become the uncle of his own family in the future, this is also something that will bring glory to his Sui family. Really? You really can't tell at such a young age. Ling Zhenchuan obviously didn't pay too much attention to Reuben's words. If you want to learn medical skills, how can it be a one-time thing? David is only in his early 20s, so he can still believe in medicine. But he did not object. "Lao Su, stay home for dinner at noon, I'll do it now." Wang Hui followed Reuben and said. "Mrs. Ling, don't bother." Reuben hurriedly said politely. "Lao Su, what's the trouble? Sit down, kill 2 games with me, and have 2 drinks with me at noon." Ling Zhenchuan waved at Reuben. When Reuben saw this, he didn't refuse, he set up the chessboard and played chess with Ling Zhenchuan. David watched from the side, hesitating again and again, should he follow Ling Zhenchuan to talk about the fact that his body had been infused with a soul ecstasy. After thinking for a while, David decided to tell Ling Zhenchuan, otherwise Ling Zhenchuan is likely to be used by the so-called Hong Kong businessmen. "Mayor Ling, I have something to tell you." David spoke up. "Young man, if you have anything, just say it." Ling Zhenchuan said without raising his head. "I just checked on you and found that someone had used a soul enchanting technique. This is someone who wants to use you, and these people are likely to be those Hong Kong businessmen." David said the truth. Just after David finished speaking, Ling Zhenchuan suddenly raised his head to look at David, put the chess pieces in his hand aside, and said with a serious face, "Young man, what kind of society is this? Is it too ignorant?" As the head of a city, Ling Zhenchuan would definitely not believe what David said in the current society. What ghosts and gods said were just a trick. After listening to David's words, Reuben's face instantly became solemn. He had seen David's strength with his own eyes in Lei Ming Guan. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, who would believe it? "David, is what you said true? Is it accurate?" Reuben asked David. David nodded. Seeing David nodding, Reuben immediately looked at Ling Zhenchuan and said, "Mayor Ling, David knows some techniques. He can really see some things that ordinary people can't understand. You should let him. Shut up. Ling Zhenchuan frowned. Old Su, thanks to your age, how can you believe what a child says nonsense? What kind of soul ecstasy, where is my soul? Mayor Ling, listen to me, really. Lao Su, if you're talking, don't blame me for seeing off guests, it's just nonsense. Ling Zhenquan's face was cold, and he was obviously disgusted by what David said. After all, in his position, how could he possibly believe the gods and ghosts? Reuben didn't dare to say more, but David shook his head slightly and didn't speak. After a while, Wang Hui invited a few people to have dinner, but at the dining table, the atmosphere was a little embarrassing, and Ling Zhenquan's face was not very good all the time. After eating, Reuben and David left without staying for long. On the way back, Reuben said a little worriedly, David, what kind of soul ecstasy did Mayor Ling really have? Really? David nodded. Then you have to find a way to save him. Mayor Ling is a rare good leader. Although he is a bit old-fashioned, he is upright and selfless. Reuben looked at David with pleading eyes. I will. In fact, Reuben does not say, David will not let the so-called Hong Kong businessmen succeed, this is related to the interests of the entire Horrendal people. Seeing David's promise to save Ling Zhenchuan, Reuben was relieved. David got out of the car halfway, and instead of going to Sue's house, he called Lin Tianhu and asked him to prepare staff. Not long after, Lin Tianhu brought dozens of people and arrived in a mighty car. Mr. Chen, is something wrong? Lin Tianhu asked. Don't ask, just follow me. David took Lin Tianhu and the others and went directly to guard outside Ling Zhenquan's Xiaoyang building. Isn't this Mayor Ling's house? Mr. Chen, what are you doing? Lin Tianhu's face was a little unnatural. Don't look at him as the underground emperor of Horrendal, but what's the use of that, he is a powerful underground emperor, isn't he afraid of Ling Zhenchuan, the underground emperor of Horrendal? Tell you not to ask. David put down the seat impatiently, then closed his eyes and rested. In a remote small hotel in Horrendal. The 3 Hong Kong businessmen live here. The environment of this hotel is very poor. The identities of the 3 Hong Kong businessmen do not match at all. No one knows why these 3 people choose to live here. In a room of the hotel, the goatee Hong Kong merchant sat on the bed, while the other 2 stood by with respectful expressions. I saw the goatee Hong Kong businessman with his eyes slightly closed, sitting cross-legged, his fingers pinching, and he was still chanting words. The gods of the earth, the gods of the 5 mountains, the gods of all directions, the auspicious clouds, come quickly. A black air rushed out of the finger of the goatee Hong Kong merchant in an instant, and then disappeared in an instant. All right. The goatee Hong Kong merchant smiled coldly. Ha ha ha, if Master Bai takes action, our business will not fail. A chubby Hong Kong businessman burst into laughter. In fact, this goatee is not a Hong Kong businessman. Among the 3 people, only the 2 fat and thin people are real Hong Kong businessmen, and the identity of this goatee is a warlock. You must know that in the outer harbour, many people believe in these things, so there are also warlocks rampant. In the outer harbour, whether it is the location of the company, the name of the child, or even when a dinner party can lead to a business negotiation, these warlocks will be counted. Although there are a lot of people who don't know anything at all, they just cheat some money and spend money, but there are still some warlocks who really have some real skills. Treat some intractable diseases. Therefore, this part of the warlocks has become more and more famous in the outer harbour, and is regarded as a guest of honor by many rich people. And this Master Bai is one of the most famous warlocks in the outer harbour. His techniques are unfathomable. These 2 Hong Kong businessmen spent a lot of money to invite them. The fat and thin Hong Kong businessmen are interested in Horrendal. They want to come here to build some highly efficient but heavily polluting enterprises, but they have long heard that Horrendal's top leaders are upright and they are afraid that it will be difficult to talk about it. Directly invited this Master Bai to come. I have the contract ready now, I'm just waiting for Ling Zhenchuan to come over to sign and seal it. When the contract is in hand, he won't be able to deny it if he wants to. The skinny Hong Kong businessman took out the contract he had prepared for a long time, and said with a gloomy smile. Using this method, they have completed many projects that are particularly difficult to discuss, and they have been tried and tested. After this is done, 50 million will be credited to my account, and I want Hong Kong dollars. Master Bai said lightly. Sure. The two Hong Kong businessmen nodded again and again, with flattering expressions on their faces. Ling Zhenquan's small Western-style building. Ling Zhenchuan, who had taken a lunch break, suddenly opened his eyes. There was not a trace of light in his eyes, and he just stared straight at the ceiling of the roof. Soon, Ling Zhenchuan stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out mechanically. Wang Hui, who was cleaning the housework in the living room, saw that Ling Zhenchuan suddenly got up, and asked in confusion, Lao Ling, is something wrong? I haven't slept for this afternoon nap. Ling Zhenchuan didn't speak, but just opened the door and walked out. This guy can't even talk. After Wang Hui muttered, she ignored it and continued to clean up the housework. Ling Zhenchuan walked out of the house, got in the car and drove away. Mr. Chen, come out, come out. After Lin Tianhu saw Ling Zhenchuan go out, he immediately pushed David. David sat up, and when he saw Ling Zhenchuan like that, he immediately understood what was going on, and followed Lin Tianhu. Follow. Lin Tianhu drove and followed directly. The car turned east and west in Horrendal, and finally stopped in front of a very remote hotel. What is Ling Zhenchuan doing here? Lin Tianhu asked in confusion. David looked at the dilapidated hotel and did not answer Lin Tianhu, but got out of the car and watched Ling Zhenchuan walk into the hotel. Order your subordinates to surround the hotel, and no one is allowed to let go. David ordered to Lin Tianhu. Lin Tianhu nodded, looked at the dozens of people he had brought with him, and said with a cold expression, Mr. Chen has an order to surround the hotel, and don't go in and out alone, if you let a fly go, I will kill you. Yes. Dozens of people from Jiatang immediately surrounded the hotel and were ready to fight. Come on, come in with me. David took Lin Tianhu into the hotel. At this moment, in a room on the second floor of the hotel, Ling Zhenchuan was standing in it, without a trace of light in his eyes. The Master Bai and two Hong Kong businessmen looked at Ling Zhenchuan who was coming, and they all burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, dignified Horrendal's number one, you're still not obediently obeying our orders. The slightly fat Hong Kong businessman laughed and patted Ling Zhenquan's face with his hand. Who would have thought that the leader of Horrendal has now become our puppet, and the entire Horrendal will be ours from now on? The skinny Hong Kong businessmen also shouted happily. Hurry up and take out the contract and let him sign it. Master Bai urged. As long as the contract is signed, even if he is a businessman, 50 million will be credited to his account. When the skinny Hong Kong businessman heard this, he hurriedly took out the contract he had prepared for a long time, and handed it to Ling Zhenchuan with a pen. Sign the contract to me. Ling Zhenchuan took the pen and signed his name without hesitation in the contract. He also took out the seal from his briefcase and stamped it on the contract. It's done, ha 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 ha. Holding the contract, the two Hong Kong businessmen laughed wildly. The corner of Master Bai's mouth was also raised. You too, since it's done, should I also pay my money? Of course, of course. The fat Hong Kong businessman hurriedly took out his mobile phone, and after a brief operation, 50 million was directly transferred to the name of Master Bai. Seeing the information on the account, Master Bai's face also bloomed with a smile. Boom! Just when the three of them were all laughing, suddenly the door was kicked open. Lin Tianhu rushed in with a fierce face, followed by David. All squat down for me, and no one is allowed to move. Lin Tianhu held a bright machete in his hand. Seeing Lin Tianhu's appearance and the knife in his hand, both Hong Kong businessmen regarded Lin Tianhu as a robber. Only that Master Bai glanced at David behind Lin Tianhu, his brows furrowed tightly. He had an impression of David and had seen it at Ling Zhenquan's house. At that time, he also faintly felt that David was a little unusual, so he took a look, but he couldn't tell what was different. David is an immortal cultivator, how could he, a little warlock, be able to sense the fluctuations of spiritual energy? Who are you? Do you know who is standing here? Dare to come and rob? The fat Hong Kong businessman shouted angrily. Yes, the one standing here is Ling Zhenchuan, the leader of Horrendal. Do you not want to live anymore? The slightly thinner Hong Kong businessman followed suit. Fkook, just squat down when you squat down, how can there be so much bullshit? Lin Tianhu immediately kicked both of his feet and directly kicked the two people to the ground. The two of them were just businessmen. They were dressed in fine clothes and food all day long. They couldn't stand Lin Tianhu's foot. Brother, you can say whatever you want, as long as you don't hurt anyone. Master Bai looked at David and asked. He could see that David was the real person in charge. What do I want? You know very well, a little soul ecstasy, dare to come to Horrendal to be wild. David raised the corner of his mouth, his face full of disdain. Who are you? Master Bai frowned. Someone who can call out the soul-sucking technique must be in the same category as him. Who am I? You don't have to know. David looked at Ling Zhenchuan with a sullen face. After Ling Zhenchuan stood motionless, a spiritual energy penetrated directly from Ling Zhenquan's forehead. Ling Zhenchuan shivered all over, and then his eyes filled with spiritual energy. Where am I? Ling Zhenchuan woke up and asked in surprise. Mayor Ling, you were attracted by these people's ecstasy. David followed Ling Zhenchuan and said. This time, Ling Zhenchuan did not directly reprimand David, but looked at the two Hong Kong businessmen who fell to the ground, and the nervous Master Bai. The heart is extremely shocked, his whole mind is blank now, his thoughts are chaotic. Come and tell Mayor Ling, what the H3LL is going on. David pointed to the two Hong Kong businessmen who fell to the ground. Speak. The machete in Lin Tianhu's hand went directly to the necks of the two of them. This time, the two Hong Kong businessmen were so frightened that they almost urinated, but when they were about to speak, Master Bai suddenly took out a cloth bag from his body, and then shook it hard. A cloud of black mist rushed out of the cloth bag, one by one with their teeth and claws, filling the entire room in an instant. Ling Zhenchuan looked at the scene in front of him, and the whole person was stunned, but Lin Tianhu didn't react. Whether it was in the Gu family or Lei Mingguan, Lin Tianhu had seen these ghosts, and David had also told Lin Tianhu about this, so he did not don't be afraid anymore. Humph, worm carving trick. David snorted coldly and suddenly opened his mouth. The black mist was instantly sucked into his stomach by David. Seeing that the black mist with claws was actually sucked into the stomach by David, Master Bai was shocked. Then Ling Zhenchuan was even more stunned. He had never seen such a situation before, these things were beyond his understanding. Pfft! Master Bai was so frightened that he knelt down directly to David. Daxian, spare your life, Daxian, spare your life. The disciple is convicted. Master Bai kept kowtow to David. From Master Bai's point of view, this David and him are the same people, but David's Taoism is much higher than his, so this Master Bai calls himself a disciple. Come and explain to Mayor Ling what's going on. David said to Master Bai. How can Master Bai dare to take a chance, and tell Ling Zhenchuan what happened in 1 to 5 times?